Today we start discussion on Economic Survey 2018-19. As you know, Economic Survey is a very important document of the government through which the government informs the parliamentarians about the state of economy and also the strategy and the policies the government plans to pursue in coming future. From examination point of view also, this document is very important for aspirants, and several questions are directly framed on the informations given, the policies and programs given, and other questions are also somewhat inspired from the discussion or analysis, not only in economy but on many other segments, social issues and sometimes environment questions, science technology questions are also somewhat related. Today we'll look at the structure of economic survey and the core of the strategy and the model which is embodied here. As you know, economic survey is divided nowadays into two parts. There is volume 1 and there is volume 2. Volume 1 has contained this year 11 chapters. Volume 2 is also divided into two parts. The second part is a statistical segment which contain 9 parts, and this is a kind of descriptive and analytical part which contains 10 chapters. We cannot capture and we cannot even briefly study all the contents of entire volume. It will take a little longer time. So today we will focus on volume 1 and particularly the chapters which deal in investment model, determinants of investment, role of saving, role of small enterprises, and the policy stand and perception of the government about labor. Chapter 1 says that investment is the most important determinant of our objective of consistent growth and continuous growth, for which the phrase which is very popular earlier also described is a virtuous cycle of growth. Many people know what exactly is virtuous cycle of growth, but let's briefly understand that if in an economy production leads to more consumption, which leads to even higher level of production, and that leads further to higher level of consumption, and that again leads to higher level of production and again higher level of consumption. This kind of spiraling up of consumption and production is considered virtuous, that is good for any economy. This is what the objectives of any society is, and through this kind of virtuous cycle, which is a kind of progress of economy, we achieve many of the economic objectives. So to create this virtuous cycle of growth, investment has been identified as the most important determinant, particularly private investment. Public investment is also important, but private investment has been said to be the prime driver of growth in any economy nowadays in India. This could be a little debatable. Some people still believe that public investment has to play a very important role. Public investment creates crowding in effect, and that is, public investment attracts private investment. So without public investment we cannot achieve a higher level of private investment. So that's a view, that's a perception, but quantitatively private investment is important, and that is also point considered. We also have to know how to influence investment. If we want to increase investment, what are the determinants of investment? Survey identifies that to encourage investment, we need to first of all reduce cost of capital. That is real interest rate should be reduced, and there is a apprehension that if we reduce real interest rate, saving may get discouraged, as was considered earlier. But in this survey, it has been said that Anglo-Saxon view that a lower rate of interest may lead to lower level of saving is not well founded in practical life. In India, it is said that saving is quite neutral to, unrelated to interest rate, and it is more influenced by the demographic feature of society, as the proportion of young persons above the age of 40 and old persons above the age of 60 is growing. Their appetite for or their preference for saving is growing autonomously, even if there is low interest rate, because they want to have future financial security. So even if rate of interest is reduced, saving it will not be discouraged and investment would be encouraged. To encourage investment, policy uncertainty must also be reduced. It has been said that during 11-12 and also sometimes in 2013, India was passing through policy paralysis. Government was not taking any policy stand firmly in or favor of or against a particular decision. So the investor community was also confused as to what to do. So policy uncertainty or a radical shift in policy discourages investment. So there should be clarity of policy, consistency in policy, and there should be advanced future guidance of the policy, that this is the policy today, and after 2 years or 3 years or 1 year, our policy may be reviewed again and we are likely to change policy in this particular direction. So that kind of guidance should also be given. If that policy certainty is maintained, investment would be encouraged. Investment has been said to be beneficial not only for expansion in capacity, but also it is beneficial for growing demand for producer goods. This increases demand in the domestic market, it expands capacity, it creates employment, and it also does a very important new thing. It does creative destruction. Creative destruction is again a controversial phrase. This new investments may lead to emergence of new enterprises, and the new enterprises may put pressure, competitive pressure on old enterprises, and in that process old enterprises may get destructed. But with the use of adjective that is creative, it is a kind of welcome that if new enterprises are leading to destruction of old enterprises, that's good, it is creative destruction. So institutional renewal continues to take place, and the economy finds a higher level of base to grow even faster, and investment also leads to growth and increase in exports. So the determinants which have been primarily considered and the benefits considered, one more determinant which is that is labor related laws and policies. So the survey says that we need to further simplify and make clarity about our labor laws, and so there is a proposal that all the existing labor laws should be modernized and integrated to have only 4 kinds of labor codes. That will give a clear picture to the domestic investors as well as foreign investors and that's how we can encourage investment. The survey, apart from focusing on investment and the determinants of investment, the benefits, also talks about behavioral economics, which is a new thing and which may behavioral economics means rather than thinking about a particular theory from deductive method, we have to look at the actual behavior of people, consumers, traders, producers, workers, and from their behavioral pattern we need to draw theoretical conclusions, and that's how we need to get policy making based on this kind of theoretical perceptions. This is not a new thing. Behavioral economics has been evolving in the world for last 70 years or more, and in our own country many advocates have been talking about behavioral economics. But in particular in this survey, nudge theory has been widely quoted. You know, nudge theory was recently news in 2017. Nobel Prize was given to an economist for developing nudge theory. Nudge theory is popular and a little bit controversial also. Nudge is a little bit persuasive pressure or soft pressure on a person to facilitate decision making. If let's say a consumer is not sure as to which product to buy and when to buy, displaying that product in the front of the shop creates a nudge effect. Or let's say whether a person wants to buy insurance policy or doesn't want to buy at all, is not sure. Giving him a default option that if he does not say yes or no, the option default would be automatically selected and that would be yes. This is kind of nudging. So putting a pressure of persuasive nature, of soft pressure, is kind of nudge. In policy making, nudge theory has been widely practiced in America. It is said that Obama used this nudge theory to promote his healthcare schemes and many other schemes. Many other governments are using nudging. So in Western countries, nudging is widely popular and controversial also. Some people say that nudging a person, whether consumer or producer, a small entrepreneur or big entrepreneur, is immoral. It is undemocratic. But the proponents who support it say that no, this is a kind of paternal behavior. Mother and father also put pressure on their kids. So if a state is also a paternal organization, it should be allowed to put a little pressure on citizens so as to facilitate decision making, so as to facilitate consumption decisions, so as to facilitate production investment decisions, so as to also facilitate saving decisions, etc. So in the name of behavioral economics, nudge theory has been proposed to be followed. And in India, it is said that Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is also based on nudging of people, and giving a gas connection to rural women is also kind of nudging. They are giving them broader structure of choices so that they can choose a particular option which is in their best interest. So many things has been talked about. Nudging in detail. Nudging theory requires more rigorous analysis, but that's one thing. With this investment kind of strategy, investment led growth strategy, another dimension which is been touched here is about the relative performance of small enterprises and large enterprises within private sector. In this survey, it has been discussed, quoting several studies, that there are some small enterprises which are stagnant. They have been said to be dwarfs. And there are some enterprises which are dynamic. They are called young and small enterprises. Dwarfs are those which employ less than 100 workers. The dwarfs are also those which are more than 10 years old. And young enterprises are those which employ less than 100 workers. But they are less than 10 years old. So distinction is 10 years plus is small and 10 years old is dwarf, small and less than 10 years is young. In both the condition, they employ 100 workers, not 1,000. Large enterprises are those which employ more than 100 workers. This kind of distinction has not initially been made. Later on, that is also been introduced. But first of all, some factual observations are given in this survey that those enterprises which are dwarfs, which employ less than 100 workers and which are more than 10 years old, their number is 50% in manufacturing industries. If we count all the enterprise in manufacturing industries, dwarf constitute 50% of all the manufacturing enterprises. But their contribution in manufacturing production is not proportionate. Their contribution is only 7.6%. And their contribution in total employment in manufacturing sector is only 14.1%. So the observation is that though they dominate numerically the manufacturing industries, dwarfs, they have not been contributing to society through employment. They are not contributing much to the production sector through their value addition or production. Young enterprises, on the other hand, their number is only 5.5% among all the manufacturing enterprises. Their contribution in production is 37.2%. They are 50%, contribute 7.6%. They are 5.5% and contribute 37.2%. So they are more productive, the young ones, and the old ones are less productive. And their contribution in total employment in manufacturing sector is 21.2%. So they are better contributing to society through employment generation. They are better contributing to economy through their value addition in manufacturing sector, though their number is quite low compared to their number. And if we look at the large enterprises, it has been said that their number is 10.2%. Their contribution in production is 50%. And their contribution in total manufacturing employment is 50%. And the problem is that these three numbers do not add to make 100%. Where are the missing numbers? Survey is not very clear about it. This also do not add up to 100%. 50 plus 37, 87, 94, 95, 5% missing. So there is lack of consistency in this data given. The data has been again presented in another way to show the relative importance of small and large enterprises, among them old and new ones. It is said that all the small firms in organized manufacturing. If you look at all the small firms, the number is 85%, and their total share of total employment is 23%. Large firms, on the other hand, the number is only 15% in organized manufacturing, but the share of employment is 77%. There is a popular theoretical perception for long that small enterprises are labor intensive, so they create more jobs. The survey contends that large enterprises, even if their number is small, create more jobs. 77% of organized manufacturing jobs are here. But survey is not in the same vein suggests that what about the unorganized manufacturing sector? Maybe the whole the entire universe, the entire population of organized manufacturing enterprises is very small, and if you look at unorganized manufacturing enterprises, their number would be much bigger, and in unorganized manufacturing the number of small enterprises may be even bigger, and the job would be even there. We know that in total number of jobs in India, 93-94% jobs are in unorganized sector. But still, this observation is also useful that in organized manufacturing sectors, large enterprises are creating more jobs, small enterprises are creating less jobs. Among all the enterprises manufacturing sector, including unorganized, some enterprises which are very old are not creating jobs, they are not producing fast enough. And the reason has been identified for this kind of stagnation in manufacturing industries and is complex labor laws, one, and another that the incentive structure which is followed by the government discourages enterprises to grow bigger. Incentive structure encourages them, incentivizes them to remain small. So even if they are capable of growing up, they refuse to grow up so as to enjoy the tax concessions, the subsidies, and various other kinds of relaxation for small enterprises. We'll discuss that part also. The survey says that incentives are of different types. Some incentives are fiscal in nature, others are of monetary nature, and there are many other kinds of incentives. Among fiscal incentives, there are tax concessions, there are subsidies. Among monetary, there are cheap fund, relaxed repayment schedule, dwarf institutions enjoy these incentives and they try to remain dwarf so as to continue to enjoy incentives. They don't grow up fast enough. Other concessions include basically labor law related concessions. We know that there are so many labor laws in India. Survey says that almost number is 100 labor laws or laws which influence employment of labor. In some labor laws, the enterprises employing 10 persons or less and using power are called small enterprises. In other labor laws, enterprises employing less than 20 persons are called small enterprises. And the incentives are linked to that. If a enterprise is employing less than 10 workers, it is qualified for certain incentives. But the moment it employs 11th worker, 12th worker, they have to forego these incentives. So they deliberately keep their workers number of workers less than 10, and if they need more workers, rather than taking on them on payroll, regular salaried job, they take on contractual job, or they outsource certain processes of their business so as to keep the number of workers on payroll less than 10 and continue to enjoy these incentives. So this is a problem. This is creating problem, and this is creating this kind of dwarf enterprises. So the suggestion in the survey is that we need to reform the labor laws. We should not link this incentive to enterprise based on the number of workers, or the number of workers should be increased, that even if they employ more than 100 workers, they'll continue to enjoy these incentives, or if they employ even more than 500 workers, they'll continue to enjoy these benefits. The problem is that if we relax the labor laws this way, larger enterprises which employ more than 100 workers would claim these incentives, and in that case these small enterprises would be crowded out in that competition for incentives. So that's a contentious issue. We need more debate, but the new idea is welcome, that let's think over this issue. Proposal is also that in the survey, that for this kind of incentives we should have a sunset clause, that these incentives can be enjoyed by enterprise for, let's say, 6 years and 7 years only. Once this period of 7 years has expired, the incentives would automatically be withdrawn from those older enterprises. So if this sunset clause is incorporated in the scheme, dwarfs would not remain deliberately dwarf, because that will not give them any incentives. Still they'll try to grow bigger. They'll scale up their productions, and in that process they will employ more workers. So this will be growth, good for growth and good for employment generation also. So one thing in the survey is that we should focus on investment, particularly private investment, and to make this private investment led growth model work for generating more growth and generating more jobs, we need to change the incentive structure, labor laws. And yet another thing which has been said, that if we want this model to work, apart from these things, we need to focus on legal reforms. In one particular chapter, the status of the legal system in India, lower judiciary, high court, supreme court, the backlog of litigation cases has been described in factual details. And we know that if, let's say, there is a single dispute, at least 2 persons get blocked. They have to withdraw from their production exercise or trading exercise. So more and more litigations means more and more workers will be withdrawn from the mainstream of economic cycle. So if we want the economic cycle to be equipped with as many workers, as many entrepreneurs as possible, at least legal systems should not create that logjam. And many reforms have been suggested, that we need to appoint more judges, we need to increase their work efficiency, we need to incorporate technology and new kinds of instruments to empower them to work faster, and we need also expand working hours of the courts. We can run in the same building 2 courts, one morning, one evening courts, capacity expansion. So we'll not go into the details of that. Legal reform is important. There are many litigations. Contract enforcement in India is weak. In business, ease of doing business, one has been outlined by the World Bank, that India need to work on improving contract enforcement regime. So legal reform is important for that. If legal reform is done, sunset clause is introduced, labor laws are reformed, if interest rate is reduced, and if infrastructure is built upon, our economy would grow and grow consistently, and will achieve growth, jobful employment. One observation here in the survey is an attempt to compare between India and America and Mexico and many other countries of the world. The phenomenon that old enterprises in India don't become bigger job creators. Old enterprise in America becomes many times bigger job creators. So this is a kind of institutional status And some factual observations are given that if, let's say, in America, an enterprise becomes 40 years old, it becomes 7 times bigger employer than its initial days. In Mexico, the enterprise which has grown to be 40 years or more becomes at least twice as many job creators as its initial days, so 2 times bigger. But India, the enterprise which are 40 years old or more than 40 years old, they have added or increased jobs by only 40%. Now, this is a kind of vague comparison. The language of the survey is not very clear that which sector of enterprise has been chosen. Let's say if you choose from America trading companies. Trading companies are more labor intensive than steel making companies. Sectors have not been disclosed, which sectors have been picked up from America, which sectors have been picked up from India, which sectors have been picked up from Mexico. But that's interesting observation. The point is that even if the issues are controversial, that makes it interesting, and attention of UPSC gets attracted. Questions would be formulated. From examination point of view, it is very interesting and very useful book. You need to study it a little bit in detail. We'll try to attract your attention to the core of the issues. The factual details we cannot give in a brief time constraint. The other facts, you know that economic survey was introduced in 1958. First time it was presented in the parliament. Before economic survey, a document was presented in the parliament to explain the status of economy, and that document was called White Paper on Indian Economy before 1958. The survey was introduced by the Prime Minister himself, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, in 1958. Thereafter, another Prime Minister presented the survey in budget, that is Mrs. Indira Gandhi, in 1970. And yet again, another Prime Minister presented the survey in Mr. Rajiv Gandhi when he was holding the Ministry of Finance. So, 3 Prime Ministers have presented survey in the Parliament. Otherwise, survey is generally presented by Finance Minister, and in fact, those Prime Ministers are also presenting the survey in the capacity of Finance Ministers. There is another fact that in 2003, FRBM Act was passed, and in FRBM Act there is a provision that apart from this annual economic survey, half-yearly economic review should also be presented in the Parliament. So, the first half-yearly economic review, that is not called survey, that is called economic review, was presented in November 2003, and there is a provision also that quarterly economic review should also be presented in the Parliament. So, the first quarterly review was presented in the Parliament in July 2003. So, economic survey introduced in 1958, quarterly economic review in July 2003, and half-yearly economic review in not November, it is 2nd December 2003. These 3 documents are important. Many questions are framed on the informations contained. There are many schemes and there are many programs, there are many policies. Creative destruction, nudge, these are new phrases. Virtuous cycle is an old phrase which has been repeatedly talked about in this survey. And chapters, you need to first of all look at the chapters. In the first volume, last 5 chapters, out of 11 chapters, last 5 chapters deal with some issues of inclusion. Rest of the chapters are relating to issues of growth and determinants of growth. We will offer the details of the programs and schemes and some highlights of the second volume of the economic survey in our next video.